There's a bunch of enthusiastic nods.
Okay.
There we go.
Yeah. So for those of you who have not met Dr. Canessler, he is the director of the Center for Enhanced Learning and Teaching at the University of Kentucky. And he is also co-chair of ADVANCE, which is the University of Kentucky's task force on AI. So you're the expert. We appreciate you being here. Come on up and I'll turn it over to you.
Cool. Good evening. It's good to see everybody online and in the actual room. So for those who are in Zoom, I will have the chat window open. I'll try to look at it. So if I haven't seen a chat in a while, you can just poke me in the back or, send up a flare. Yeah. I'll say a few words by way of introduction, but just to put a question in your head right now, just think about what it is you really would like to learn about AI tonight, a question you'd want answered, et cetera. Just think about that right now. So I am at UK. If you were here last time, you've heard a little bit about what I do. I work for a central office called CELT, or the Center for Teaching and Learning at UK. And ever since January 2023, we've been doing a lot of the central training and workshop and consultation and education around AI, and in particular, the specific kind of chat GPT type AI that we've seen and what it means for education. But I also follow a lot of the general development of this technology and what it means for our life and our work. And it's very rapid. It changes all the time. And that's kind of the reason that I'm here again, because some of the things are the same and some of the things are different, and some of the things are very different. And some of the speculative possibilities are, in fact, radically different if we imagine where things might be going. So what I'm here to do is talk a little bit about what I'm calling generative AI at 2.5 years later. What is it? Where are we going with it? How can we use it, etc. But first, I want to make sure that we're answering the questions that matter. Are there some burning questions you all have brought with you that I should make sure that we address tonight? Things you're wondering?
One of the things I've read a lot about is how scammers are using AI to scam us more.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah. So say deep fakes. Okay, deep fakes, scams. What else is just a burning question?
Mm-hmm. AI is capable of, making my face look like I'm saying something I'm not.
Uh-huh.
That's cool.
Yeah, it's a kind of scam or deep fake. We can talk about that. Yeah. Yeah. Which AI is the best AI? Yeah, that's you're right. Yeah, which ones? How to choose? It was easier in December 2022. So you had one choice. It's ChatGPT. But now you've got lots of choices, things that you could choose. That's great. What else that you want to make sure I address tonight? And I'm looking at the chat too if you're in Zoom. So if you want to type something in the chat, I'll try to see it. Yeah.
What applications can you have to use it?
Okay. Yep. How to use it. What? To use. Anything else? All right. So we'll talk a little bit about where we've been, where we're going. I'll try to answer these. Poke me if I don't. I want to make sure I do get to them, because some of these are coming up a lot more now. Deepfakes and scams and that sort of a thing to be aware of. So there's lots of different kinds of AI. There's certain kinds that can do this a lot better, how to choose them as well. So this all began in November of 2022. This and it really didn't all begin in November 2022. So I'm already just going to contradict myself here. But for all of us who just use stuff on the internet, this started in November 2022. For the people who research AI, this started, I don't know how you backdate it, in 1956 at Dartmouth. This could have started in 2016 with Google DeepMind. This could have started a lot before the 20th century with some of Charles Babbage and Ada Lovelace and some of the early computer scientists. But for most of us, November 2022 is when ChatGPT first came out. When it first came out, did anyone use it at first? Regular ChatGPT? Yeah. Has anyone used ChatGPT in here? A little bit? Yeah. It's the Xerox. And when I say it's the Xerox, I mean that it's the company that the brand identity that has come to stand in for a whole technology. When we say Chat GPT, we really mean this specific kind of AI that we're using, but there's lots of other kinds. So people use it interchangeably. They say Chat GPT, they kind of mean AI. I grew up in the South. I grew up in Texas. So when we went to restaurants, they'd say, "What kind of Coke do you want to drink?" You're like, "What? What kind of a question is that? Are you asking cherry Coke or regular Coke? Is that what you mean? Diet Coke or regular Coke?" It's like, no, because what kind of Coke do you mean? I want a Sprite. Okay. So ChatGPT is sort of the Coke or the Xerox of generative AI, but and I'm using the phrase generative AI. Has anyone heard that phrase, generative AI, not just AI? Yeah. So this is going to be one of the differences because one of the like big sort of criticisms, and when I say criticism, I just mean kind of a very useful critique, not just an angry tirade, but a very useful critique that some computer scientists, that some AI experts are reminding us of, is that the term AI is sometimes really not very helpful because it's such a broad term. It can mean lots of different things. There's people who speculate about this thing called artificial general intelligence or AGI. And that's the kind of sci-fi AI that we think about when it's like a robot that's become self-aware. It can think, it's learning what feelings are, it knows how to navigate through life. It's in some of those science fiction stories where we suddenly have to deal with the question of is a robot that in every way behaves and moves through the world like a human being, a person, legally speaking or morally speaking, you know. So artificial general intelligence is a very kind of far-flung speculative kind of AI. Then there's other kinds of AI that really are just kind of like they would call narrow AI. They call it narrow AI, which are very specific purposes. So if you think about what people in medicine do, they have, let's say you're a radiologist and you have millions and millions of images that you're looking at. You might have an AI analyze all of these images to identify anomalies, let's say, if you're doing some scans and you want some help. It might learn from patterns of millions and millions of images of people that have a specific kind of ailment. And so then when you're doing a scan, they might have the computer look at that image, compare it with what it's learned by looking at millions of images. That's narrow AI. It's for a very specific purpose. And it's giving you an analysis of that image, essentially. Nothing else, right? It doesn't know how to go to the grocery store. It can't do anything else. Now, generative AI, which is the topic that I'm talking about, generative, and none of these titles roll off the tongue very well. They're not very intuitive to talk about. But generative AI just means that it's generating things, it's making things. So, in addition to analyzing images, you're a radiologist, all you're doing is analyzing, you're not making anything. You're asking the computer to look at all those images and say, based on what you've learned from analyzing millions of images of people with this particular ailment, what do you think? Where's the analysis on this one? Generative AI is to say, write me a 5-page paper on Moby Dick. And it writes you a 5-page paper on Moby Dick. Or generative AI is to say, make me a radiological image that looks like somebody who has this disorder, and it makes that image for you. It's that making, the creating, the generating. That's what sets this thing apart from some other kinds of AI that we've had, narrow AI. And then that's also what sets it apart from this speculative, largely fictional notion of artificial general intelligence. So we're not yet at the point where we're talking about entities that are walking around in robot bodies or that exist on the internet, etc. So generative AI is kind of what I'm talking about right here. So making things based on you giving it instructions and then extending those instructions as a dialogue. So that's how it works. This thing right here, this little fun decoration on my slide, like we have my slide. I use Google Slides for my slides. This little thing right here, it's moving. I would be pretty clever if I had to figure out how to make that, because that's a format called a GIF. It's an animated image. It has these words on it that have different colors. I would have to code all those colors based on some different kind of web-based coding, probably some JavaScript, probably some CSS. I don't know. It might even need some Python. I don't know. I'm not a programmer. My background is in the humanities, English, writing, etc. So I don't really know how to do that. But what I did do was I can just say, just to show you what it means to generate, says I'm using natural language to generate something, to ask it to make something. So I'm just going to say that I need a tall, thin, rectangular image that is a looping GIF. And the background is, let's say, white and different icons related to household pets are scrolling up the image in an extended loop. Okay, so that's kind of silly, right? So I'm going to pause and say that one of the things when you think about generative AI, your own, it's not that your own creativity is the limit, right? It's just to say that this is capable of doing a lot more than basic humdrum tasks. You can ask it to be kind of creative, off the wall. And that's one of the superpowers of generative AI compared to some other programs that you might use, is it can really just take instructions that are a little bizarre, maybe a little bit difficult, challenging, and it can do its best. What I have open right here is ChatGPT, just to tell you what I have. There's a lot of different options. I figured I would start with the Xerox, the most well-known.
And that would pull up?
So I'm going to press enter. We're going to watch it. And this is where it's going to crash or something because I'm doing it in front of you. But here it's thinking. So this is, it's talking to me here. It says it's thinking. You want a tall, it's rewording my request, essentially. It's saying you want a tall, thin, animated GIF. It's now telling me what else it's thinking about. If you were at my presentation last year, it didn't do this. So this is one of the things that I'm going to talk about in just a minute that's changed from now to then, or from then to now. How it works, right? So it's still thinking to create, saying, okay, to create your GIF, I need to do this. But look, it thought for 40 seconds, it tells me. This is something that's really big with generative AI, whether it's ChatGPT, whether it's some other tool. They're really big about thinking now. It sounds like I'm making a joke, but they're really big about thinking and taking time to think, whereas it used to be instantaneous. Okay, so it said, here's your tall looping GIF of colorful household pet icons scrolling upward on a white background. Okay, I'm going to download the GIF sight unseen. I have no idea. We're going to go back to this. I'm just going to add a new slide here. I'm just going to make it blank. And then I'm going to see what we got with the GIF. Let's see if it's any good or if it's just really bad. I'm gonna try to turn off my my little okay, here we go. Move that. There we go. I'm gonna move it here. All right, there we go. So that was the first try. All I did was give it natural language as instructions, and you saw it was processing my instructions. It was reasoning through it by generating some text, saying, okay, the user wants this, I'm going to do that. And then it produced or generated all of this. Now, I'm going to tell you that if we were to unpack everything, if we were to expand all of its uh, thought and all of its text, I'm going to guess that we would find a lot of code here. So it's not just that it's writing in English and natural language, but it's also writing in computer code. Anything you can write or generate, anything that's text, anything that's characters that you type on a keyboard, it can generate that stuff. So here's the first, that was the first go. Let's say I'm like, okay, I mean, do we really like that? I mean, yeah, it's kind of bad. But that's how that's how this works though. It's always kind of bad at first. It's not a total magic machine that we're dealing with. It's not total magic. You have to work with it. You have to dialogue. So here's another difference between generative AI and Google or some other tool. Typically, when you Google, you type your search in once. I mean, you might do another search, but you just type in your search and that's it. You're supposed to dialogue with these generative AI tools. They're designed to be a back and forth, not a one and done for that kind of thing. So I'm going to go back here and I'm going to say, this feels, this looks, doesn't feel, this looks kind of bad. You can be blunt if you want. There's been a whole recent thing about politeness and generative AI. There always has been, but actually recently, Sam Altman, who is the CEO of OpenAI, everything's over social media nowadays too. You just have to be okay with that. And he tweeted that people being polite and adding polite text on their interactions with ChatGPT was, consuming, X additional compute energy overall. It was a ridiculous tweet. People are like, I don't know about that. Like the people that know about that stuff, they say, I don't really know if that's true. But anyway, this whole thing about politeness has recently been a part of the conversation. So I'm going to say this looks kind of bad. Can you make the loop last longer and make the animals more photorealistic? So we're just going to ask it for that. Let's see if it does it. This is.
You're not in Google. What kind of program are you in?
This is just a web browser. This is the cool thing about ChatGPT is you can just use it from any web browser. So if you're on Chrome, if you're on Safari, if you're on Firefox, if you're on Edge, if you're on uh, Opera, does anyone use Opera anymore? If any of those, any browser on your phone too, you can log into it and use it. So now it thought for 16 seconds. Now this is different. It's not giving me this format of just download the GIF because here it just made it with code, but I asked it to make it more photorealistic. So what it's done is that it's decided to make me an actual just picture instead of a file to download. I didn't know it would do that, but this is what it has decided to do. So as you see, it's creating the image. And what did I tell it to do? Make it more photorealistic. So as it's so far, so good, right? It's a bit more photorealistic. And we'll see if it animates. This is going to be the only problem is that I'm asking for a looping GIF to animate on there. But, we'll see if this is just a static image or a looping GIF. I'm going to download. Yeah, it's a PNG. So that's just a static image. So this is just a great example of how these tools are not exactly perfect, right? You give them instructions, you tell them what you want, and they try to do their best. I mean, this was really trying to do its best. It wants a photorealistic image. Okay. But yeah, photo, right? It's kind of latching onto that idea of photo. And so it just gave me a photo, right? With some photorealistic images. It can't make these images with code. with like vector graphics and stuff, it has to make an image. So it can't give me the looping GIF at this point. That's pretty good though. I mean, those are pretty good. Now let's ask it to be really creative because this is again a superpower of generative AI is that it's not encumbered by reality because it's not a brain, it's not a person. It's a very intense and complicated mathematical representation of language and images and data. So I'm going to say, great, take that image and swap out different features of each animal so that they're all mixed up hybrid versions of the animals. Make a new image with this and make a new image with this. Okay. Take the image exactly as it is. So I added exactly as it is. You have to be very clear with these things because sometimes they do not understand what you're assuming. Yes. See, thinking again, it's thinking. This is a big deal. Is it used to be fast? It used to be all about how fast these things would work. Press enter and instantly it would do everything. But one of the differences between last year and this year is that they want to slow it down.
It also depends on the speed of your computer, right?
It actually only depends on the speed of your computer insofar as your internet connection is good, because all of this is happening on a server at OpenAI. What we're seeing right here, it's not happening on my computer, it's happening on a server at OpenAI, wherever that is. I don't know where that is, but it's somewhere else. I'm sending a command to an OpenAI server. It's doing this compute, it's performing this action, it's sending the data back to my computer. So the only thing that it matters is that my computer can handle the internet connection. It can handle the data. If you're asking it to make images, can it handle the file size? And once you get into video, those are big, big things, that kind of thing. All right, so it's, yeah, go for it.
I've heard that computers you can buy with AI pieces inside.
Correct. Yeah, so this is new PCs, and I want to say they're new Dell PCs, I think. And also, if you're an Apple person, iPhones and tablets, it's a thing called Apple Intelligence. That also means that what you're getting is the actual AI model installed on this device on the hard drive. And the same thing with Dell computers. Dell will have some AI models installed directly on the hard drive, as well as software that's more in sync, that's optimized to use Microsoft's cloud AI models as well. The difficulty here in, okay, whoa, let's see. Yeah, I mean, it kind of got it, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Those ears.
Yeah. I mean, it kind of got it. It kind of got it. What I'll kind of point out is that what we're talking about here is the computer. I'm just going to draw a laptop. Here's the keyboard, screen, and then there's going to be some server farm somewhere. These are just a bunch of servers. And then, so then there's the, here, I'm just going to call this the AI model. The AI model is a file. It's a file, just like a Word document, just like a picture or anything that you would download. It's surprisingly small, especially these language models. When you hear that what they've done is vacuumed up the entire internet and all the other examples of language to then shove through a bunch of machine learning algorithms to then develop this essentially vector math beyond my comprehension, totally beyond my comprehension, model of the relationship of words and parts of words. These can be anywhere between just a few gigs, let's say about 5 gigabytes, maybe up to about, 50 at the largest. But they're very much that you can download on your computer. I mean, it seems kind of bizarre that something that powerful to where it can do stuff like this, or where you can ask it questions like, you know, plan an entire vacation for me based on my preferences. Here they are, and it can do that. But it's only that big. Yes.
So I've got the Apple Intelligence on the new
Mm-hmm.
Pro,
Mm-hmm.
and it takes a photo and then it takes images out of your photo.
Yep.
So it's the same concept.
It's the same concept. So the computer comes with, first of all, some software that it is a bit more optimized to use AI. So it'll have buttons on it that directly link you to some of the AI features in the software. And it will also have, like you're saying, some shortcuts and features there to just do things. Yes.
Question from the chat room. What are some of the negative aspects of generative AI and then how it's being dealt with?
Yeah, there we go. Okay, I'm gonna detour to that question by way of this question. So, a lot of the initial rollout of Apple Intelligence was kind of bad. People were getting summarizations of their text messages coming in. You
I
know,
don't understand that.
like you get, let's say I got 25 text messages between now and when I went home. Then I would open my phone, turn it on. It would say, you got 25 texts. Here's a summary of everything that you need to know. That was one thing, one feature. Some other features had to do with email, where you could just click a button and it could write an email for you based on what what the sender said in the email and what your other outgoing emails to that sender have had in them or other emails. So they are integrated into the devices in the sense that the software is adapting to have those buttons in there. And sometimes they have the actual files on there. Now, I'll just do some big categories for the negative aspects because I'm doing kind of like silly stuff here. But there are some kind of major concerns that I'll divide into some, and this gets at the deepfake scams as well. I'll divide into major categories of concerns with AI. I mean, the answer is it's hard to figure out what to do to deal with it because it's a wicked problem.
Oh, because he's showing you the screen. Well,
One major concern
he might be able to,
has to do with
that way
the
you can see what he's working on.
accuracy concerns. With the accuracy of what the models are telling you. So if it's summarizing your text messages for you, it gets it wrong sometimes, or it just says it in a weird way that's not quite right. Maybe it's not wrong with a capital W. And that was actually kind of one of the more viral things that people would screenshot and share with Apple Intelligence would be how, they would get a summary of their text messages and it would look like their significant others breaking up with them, even though that's not really what anybody said in those text messages, how the summary read. These tools are getting better and better and better, but the accuracy of what they're telling you, if I were to say, you know, if I were to be here and say, okay, now summarize the entire body of work of Darwin and explain how this image relates to that. Now, can it summarize the entire body of work of Darwin accurately? It's getting better and better. So when ChatGPT first rolled out in late 2022, the AI, I erased it, but the AI model that it was using was relatively primitive compared to what we have now. It was just good enough to write things that sounded human, but it would get a lot of things wrong. It would say things that were factually untrue. It would fabricate details that never existed. If you were asking it to, let's say, summarize Robinson Crusoe, it would sometimes just make up characters that weren't in the book at all, or make up events that weren't in the book at all. So accuracy at first was kind of a really uneven terrain. Obviously, it's in the best interest of OpenAI and Google and all these organizations to make the most accurate AIs possible. So they're getting a lot better for a lot of different reasons. So you don't see a ton of silly inaccuracies anymore. It just means that the inaccuracies are getting harder to detect because they're more subtle. Some of the sillier ones were when Google first put AI in its search results. And for example, if I were to say open search here, I'm going to search for, let's see, I'm going to search for um, environmental, well, impact of AI. Notice that it has Search Labs overview in the top left of the screen here. That's just Google pulling from all of its websites that it found in that search and using its own AI model, which is called Gemini, to generate an overview of all those search results. So it's telling, here's what it is. It's telling me, here's overall my search. Here's some websites. That's different than how we used to Google. We'd Google, we get a list of websites. We'd scroll down. When this first rolled out last year, there were some really silly problems with it. There were some viral images of people searching for recipes and how the search overview would tell them to make sure they put glue on their pizza. About how they were searching for wellness advice and they were getting information about how the doctors recommended consuming at least 1 stone per day. They were searching about the process for defending their master's thesis, and they were reminded that there was a snake fight portion of their thesis defense. So all of these things were errors in accuracy because the way that these tools are pulling from different information on the web or elsewhere, and the way that they're generating language and images means that accuracy remains a big problem. Another is the environmental impact. This is a really complex space right now in terms of the research to build these AI models, these files, these mathematical representations of language and images. It costs a tremendous amount of energy to train your computer essentially on analyzing all the books, all the internet, all the language it can get its hands on. The data centers that do this consume lots of energy, which means they need coolant to cool down, which means they need to use water, which means you're also using water as a natural resource, and it affects the local kind of ecosystem, particularly if data centers are located in, let's say, by a small town that all of a sudden doesn't have as much use of its reservoir because the water is being redirected. So there's a lot of environmental impact discussion. Now, the more confusing part that in terms of my sense of the research that we don't know yet is exactly how much energy it's using when we use these tools, like for each thing that we press enter on and have it do, like what does that do? How much is it like nothing if we're just asking it to write a few sentences? Is it a ton if we're asking it to do an image? Is it a lot if we're interacting with it back and forth? It's kind of conflicting, and there's a lot of misinformation out there right now. So we don't really know precisely what the impact is for using it. But we do know that at least developing it takes a tremendous amount of energy, and that's why there's a lot of interest, particularly at the national level, around sort of thinking about energy policy and how it might better serve AI development. You read about things like reactivating 3 Mile Island, for instance, to fuel, the development of AI models. So the environment's another concern. I'm going to put here to sort of that it's a black box. If you think about using these tools that I've been using to be silly here to actually make decisions, then it becomes a lot more serious, right? So if I am an admissions officer at a college and we have a ton of admissions essays or yeah, application essays that I'm looking at, and I'm using an AI to help me decide which ones are better and why, then it's a much more serious proposition. I don't know how AI comes to its decisions sometimes if I ask it which one is better or not. It can try to explain its reasoning to me, but I don't ultimately have that explainability, that accountability if I'm asking AI to make decisions for me. The same thing we could say for grading. This is a big deal in the conversation about using AI for grading right now. So that's one of the biggest kind of time, uh, biggest users of time for instructors is grading, particularly if you're going to grade writing, things that are not quantitative. And it's like, oh, it'd be great if we could use AI to grade this stuff for us. And then, well, even if you give it rubrics, even if you give it instructions, it becomes difficult to explain whether or not how it came to a decision is ultimately very fair, is consistent to how it's judged every other piece of work, etc. So it's a black box technology. Even its own developers can't really explain to you input to output. If you're to give it like a CT scan, they couldn't explain to you what's going on in its brain. It doesn't have a brain, but if it had a brain, they couldn't tell you what's going on in the brain. And that's one of the, I think, bleeding edge research areas right now is could you actually map a thought in a language model, which is a really interesting question. Black box is a big concern. When it comes to, let's say, impact on jobs, of course. I'm sure some of you have heard different opinions about whether or not certain jobs are going to still be relevant now that these sorts of AI tools are out there. On the one hand, it seems like it makes sense according to a larger historical narrative in which technological advancement always makes certain kinds of labor either more boutique or completely unnecessary. One of the more famous things that Sam Altman, again, he's a provocateur, so he likes to say things that are gonna get a rise out of people. But he famously said recently, like it's not as if people want to be lamplighters anymore, right? So there's this idea of the inevitability of progress that this technology is going to just render entire classes of jobs obsolete. Now, some of the more aggressive propositions are to say that things like teachers are going to be obsolete with these kind of language generating tools and these image generating tools that theoretically could work with students to give them customized learning experiences tailored to their level and experience of learning. I don't believe that, but that's something that, people are saying. The challenge is the impact on jobs, and that ultimately comes to how we want to use it. Another issue has to do with called de-skilling is the larger category. De-skilling meaning that if we are offloading some cognitive effort to AI tools to help us think through things, if we have the AI do it instead of us doing it, are we de-skilling ourselves by no longer doing things on our own? For example, writing things. If we're no longer writing messages to each other, just having AI write it for us. Does that de-skill us as writers and communicators? I'm in the education world, so when I think about de-skilling, we're thinking about student learning, and we're thinking about whether or not students are going to enter the world with the kinds of skills and competencies that you would expect a graduate to have. And so if you over rely on, whether it's to write, whether it's to reason through problems, whether it's um, to know how to approach a problem or have a certain body of knowledge, Is it completely offloaded to the AI, and is that a good thing? Because some things we can offload and it's fine, things that don't really matter, things that don't really have any implication for our skills, but a lot of things can be. Also a concern, and you may not see it because I'm writing down, my computer's covering it, but I just wrote bias. There's concern over how even as sophisticated as these models can be, that they might still evince a kind of bias towards either, and there's lots of different kinds of bias. There's bias in terms of representation, in terms of who's being represented and how, or who's not being represented. There's bias in terms of cognitive biases. We have things like anchor bias, where the first thing that we hear is the thing that sticks with us, right? So there's lots of different kinds of human biases that can get baked into these things because they're basically studying human writing. And so they learn from all the human writing. What I'm going to do to illustrate part of this, and I really don't know, I haven't tried this with the newest language model, so we'll see how it does. I'm going to say that you need to pitch a movie script in 2 brief paragraphs. The movie should have a reasonable story structure and be appealing to an audience. You're pitching to some studio executives that are trapped with you in an elevator. The movie takes place in Harlan, Kentucky. Let's see what it says.
About Apple, but I have an Android.
Mm-hmm.
So what kind of AI does it have there?
It'll likely have Copilot instead of ChatGPT. Copilot is Microsoft's. It is actually the same AI as ChatGPT because Microsoft is an owner of OpenAI, or I should say investor in OpenAI, and they've taken the language models that OpenAI has developed and they've modified them for Microsoft. They call it Copilot, but it's the same. It's almost the same thing. So you would have Copilot there.
This Copilot, it then asks me questions. It said,
Mhm.
"Can I answer what you wanted? And are you thinking about investing in that?"
So they have different weird behaviors, right? And so Copilot's going to behave differently than ChatGPT is going to behave, and Anthropic's Claude is going to behave differently. So they all have these kind of behind the scenes instructions. So here it's thought for only 6 seconds this time, but to be fair, I was not asking it to make a picture. So only 6 seconds. So picture coal dust and bluegrass, a heart-pounding Appalachian thriller with the soul of a family drama, when Ruby Mae Turner, I'm going to pause on that name, a brilliant but under the radar geology PhD, okay, who fled Harlan, returns home for her father's funeral. So an abandoned mine. All right, so what's the first place it goes to when I mention Eastern Kentucky? Coal and mines, right? I mean, it's not absurd, right? That's where a lot of mining happened, right? Or but so we have this, we have with the town on the brink of economic collapse. So we have this idea that it's sort of the economy's bottomed out on a small town. There's a cash hungry energy conglomerate that moves in. So, I mean, it is what it is, but you can read this. It's the first thing it produced. I could go back and say, you know, your job is to assess for any bias and correct it, but keep it plausible. So another trick with using generative AI is to ask it to assess its own work. Um, you never stop with the first thing you get. But here it's defending its choice. Notice this. A high stakes, it's high stakes, Appalachian drama that treats Harlan, Kentucky not as a stereotype, but as a community of innovators, artists, and workers. Okay. So it seems to be defending its choice here and saying, okay, I'm going to say, come up with a rubric for assessing bias in movie pitches according to place-based stereotypes. There should be a scoring component. So come up with a rubric for assessing bias. I'm going to ask it to do that. It should be able to do this relatively quickly. Okay. So here it's like, I'm not going to read all this, but it's coming up with its rubric. Okay, I'm going to say, use this rubric and score the movie you just pitched. Explain your scoring. Let's see where it scores. So again, I'm dialoguing. I'm going back and forth with this thing. I'm not just taking the first answer. So now it's giving it some scores based on its own criteria that it's generated. So total score is 34 out of 40, not bad. So 28 to 34, generally unbiased band. Okay. So anyway, all of this is just showing you A, some things you can do, but B, how bias is still concerned with generative AI. When it comes to, I think the last thing I'll say is harm is a big concern. And this will get me to the deep fake scams, etc. So harm what is different than bias. Bias is just, how is it representing people, or what kinds of limits to its thinking are we seeing? Does it have an anchor bias? Does it not? Um, does it have the same kind of human bias towards data that a human might? That's the question of bias. Harm is how we use it and how it impacts people, real people. There's, for example, conversation around facial recognition AI and how that's used at security checkpoints, or how it's used in urban settings as well, and how the facial recognition visual AI is sometimes inaccurate and can flag people incorrectly for their identity. And then those people are identified as, a criminal, and they're detained and all this. And there's all these sort of really bad things that can happen to them. That's one example of harm that could happen. Deep fakes and scams also harm if people are using AI inappropriately. Um, it's surprising, and I don't want to end this on a scary note, but the amount of off the shelf tools that will allow you to create a reasonably effective deep fake is kind of astounding. So if I were to go to, just say, Hey Jen, let's do Hey Jen. So with Hey Jen, for example, you have video avatars that you can create. So this is just a person that doesn't really exist, but HeyGen is a tool that you can do it with. Synthesia is also another AI tool. It's not Descript, wrong thing. Synthesia is the one too. So you can create deep fakes with these sorts of things, where you just give it your own 30 seconds of you talking, and then it can create video of you saying anything at that point, just with instructions and stuff. And it's still kind of uncanny in the sense that it tends to exaggerate people's mannerisms sometimes. And if you look at the mouth carefully, it may not be exactly right, but they're getting pretty convincing. And so with scams and deep fakes, it becomes an issue, because the video can be pretty convincing. You take just sometimes a picture of a person, not a video of a person, but just a picture of them, and use that to then generate some video. Audio is also something that's relatively easy to work with. This is just a tool called 11 Labs, where you can do your own voice, upload your own voice, and then have anything read in your voice. This was I've seen this pitched in the early days of generative AI as a solution for scaling online learning, where the instructor of a class could be made to, have different lectures and stuff without the high cost of producing videos that you would then have to edit, etc. Like you can just have this to where the instructor could just type out their own script. They wouldn't have to go into the media production studio beyond that point. But this is also kind of a problem of harm when it's really easy to get someone's voice and make it say whatever you want. I mean, there's some high profile instances of this with like the Biden calls in New Hampshire back during the presidential race, right? There was the calls that wasn't really Biden. It was just a sort of deep faked Biden voice saying things.
So take your voice and put it in on the face of a dog.
You could do that. Yeah. Yeah. There's a really, on the silly end, and the silly end is obviously, maybe kind of detracting from our sense of the harm, but there's like really funny accounts that will make like at the press conferences after, an NFL game, they'll just have the coaches say whatever, about the referees. They can make the coaches say anything and using those videos. So that's kind of funny, but you could have your voice come out of a dog. I recently saw some videos where people were taking, some podcasters and making it look like they were babies talking on the podcast. So you can really kind of do it with anything if you're combining these different tools. If you have the audio, if you have some of the video tools, and you have enough practice, because it is kind of difficult to do that stuff. It's not as easy as what I was doing in front of all of you, which is just kind of some basic stuff, which is the limitation of my thing. This is it's such a problem, or such a potential problem, that I know that a lot of folks have really unironically with their families kind of come up with little code words and stuff that they'll use if they ever suspect that they're in a situation where it starts to feel a little fishy, like a conversation they're having. Then there's like a code word or a phrase that they know as a family, just to make sure that like this isn't some kind of like deep faked AI of my nephew that I'm talking to, but it's like the real person that I'm talking to. So this is harm. Harm is in any aspect of whether it's someone using AI systems in bad faith to try to inflict harm, or it's that the AI system itself can be deployed in such a way that it inflicts harm, like with misidentified facial recognition, etc. That's another major concern with AI. I know there's another question in the chat that says, when the AI symbol appears on Word, what does that mean? What will that AI do? What that does is that it's going to help you with anything on your Microsoft Word document that you're looking at. This is increasingly what we're going to see now. It's not like I'm just going to open a web browser here and go to chatgpt.com, and there I am at chatgpt.com. I'm going to maybe, let's say, be working in my Google Slides. Here's my Google Slides with my amazing GIF that's in there. And I might say here, it's kind of hard to see, but I'm hovering over a little icon that's the equivalent of what you're asking about, Debbie, in the chat. I'm going to click Ask Gemini. And what we're going to see more and more of is that this is going to be integrated into the tools that we use. And it's not going to be something that we just go to separately as a website, right? So this is just Google Slides. It's not an AI program or anything, but it has integrated Gemini, because Google is Gemini, into what we're doing here. I'm going to move my Zoom thing, which is in the way. I'm going to enter a prompt, and I'm going to say, based on what you see on this cover slide, what is something in my Google Drive I should make sure to include for a presentation on the current state of AI? Pull from my recent presentations, as well as other documents and files. So this is connected to my Google Drive, and I'm just asking it to look through my data Now it's giving me some recommendations about what to do. So this is a co-intelligence move here. A phrase that people use is co-intelligence or co-pilot, that is, to where I'm using it as a kind of thought partner to work here. Um, it'll appear in different ways, whether you're using it in Microsoft Word, using it in Google, using it in Adobe. It's going to look slightly different, but it'll be plugged in to these tools more and more as we're seeing. Yep.
Would you recommend obtaining a Python certificate to give us good marketable AI skills?
Yeah, okay, good question. So there's two answers to the AI skills question. So if it's skills in using these generative AI tools to do work, I don't think you need to know how to code at all. If it's skills in using generative AI in the workplace, like if I am going to work in finance, what are the ways that folks that work, in equity firms, how do they use generative AI productively to where they're still kind of in charge of their work and they have human accountability, but they're also kind of supercharging their productivity? How can they make sure that they're using the tools without risking harm, without some accuracy issues, etc.? Then I think it's more about using the tools effectively in professional settings and just having practice with that. Now, if you're talking about developing, like working in the space of developing AI models, actually making them, then you'll probably want to get more into the computer science side of things. So you bring up Python in the question, and coding is actually one of the skills that, depending on who you ask, is on the chopping block right now, which is interesting because 5 years ago, 10 years ago, the idea was that everyone needed to know how to code. That was going to be the skill. You need to know how to code. Doesn't matter what job you're going into, know how to code so that you can be employable, marketable. And we've done a 180 on that at this point because these tools are so good at spitting out code. It's text. They've studied all the code on the internet. They've studied all the languages. And so when it comes to low-level coding, everyday kind of coding, fast food style coding jobs, essentially, the argument is we don't really need people to do those anymore. We just have people using these AI tools to do the work of 10 people, etc. I'm not endorsing that necessarily. I'm just saying that's one of the debates that's going on right now with coding. So Python kind of brings up that kind of coding issue. All right. One thing I'm going to leave you with, because it's another thing that we're getting into, is how these tools are not just in one media form anymore. They transform things into other media forms. What I'm going to leave you with is another Google tool, if I can find it, because I'm really disordered. Here we go. This is called Google Notebook LM. It's a strange name. Google, if you want to play with Google, I would recommend starting there. In fact, if you have a Google, I know ChatGPT is the Xerox, but you can get a Google account for free and you don't really have to give it much information. You can even make up a birthday and a name. It won't know, You can just give it all fake information. And Google has a suite of tools that are really interesting. This one's called Notebook LM. On the left-hand side here, I've uploaded a bunch of PDF files from a recent journal in my field of educational development, a bunch of articles that were published about the work. On the one hand, I can chat with those articles in this middle pane, but what I'd like to do, just to kind of demonstrate where we're headed with this, is more media translation, more transmediation, to where you take something and transform it into other media forms. I'm going to tell it to generate a podcast based on these 11 articles an NPR style podcast. And they make it so easy. I'm just going to click generate. So it's going to generate a podcast that's hopefully playable very soon. But this is going to combine the stuff about voices. It's going to combine its ability to read a lot of text and learn from a lot of text, and then also generate or produce text in a very specific format. In this case, what would a script for a podcast look like, and how might it sound? So as it's doing that, I'm going to go ahead and look at the middle here, just to again show you where we're headed, because I was talking with ChatGPT earlier and I didn't have any sources necessarily. But here I can say identify some connecting themes in these articles, even though they are about very different things. And it's going to focus on those articles in the middle. And this is powered by Google's Gemini. So again, this is where we're headed. It's not just chatting with ChatGPT, it's uploading files and talking to those files. So here it's saying, here's some big themes: the evolving role of educational developers. Okay. So it's giving me some citations. It's saying the importance of collaboration. It's reading all these files and it's saying, well, here's some connecting ideas, even though the studies are all very different for those ideas. Should have clicked the podcast thing sooner because it's like, you know, we'll see. If it doesn't do it in like the next minute, then I'll give up. But it is an interesting demonstration of how we can do that. Is there maybe one more question I can address before I kind of give this one a wrap?
You have a student that's turned in a paper.
Mm-hmm.
Can you ask AI if this is an AI?
Ah, good question. Yes. You're asking about detectors. So this gets at another problem, another concern, which is authorship. How do you know a person wrote the thing that you're looking at? How do you know a person made the thing that you're looking at? That's a big problem. Um, AI tools, all these tools, this is actually an easy answer. They cannot tell you. Flat out, that is not how they work. Okay. However, there is a different kind of tool, and they go by different names. They like AI detectors, AI classifiers, slightly different names. But those tools are designed to assess the likelihood that a text was AI written as opposed to human written. I say likelihood because there's no proof positive. It's different if someone plagiarizes, right? If I take someone else's, someone writes a short story and I notice that short story and it's really good and I just take it and I publish it under my own name. But you could maybe say, well, you can see it on that person's blog from 5 years ago. And then you posted it here. It's the same story. You can point to that as evidence. It exists in the world. Because these are generating new things, there's no such thing that you can point to say that this already exists. It's new. You just didn't write it. An AI did. And so what the detectors do is a bunch of fancy math to assess whether or not the pattern of language is probable of being AI output. The statistical pattern of language that it's putting out there. How likely is it? So you get percent scores, 20%, 33%, etc. These are notoriously, in some cases, unreliable, in all cases, controversial right now because there's no such thing as a truly effective AI detector. It's always a kind of statistical analysis and a guess. There's other ways in school right now that we're trying to deal with this, which is doing process documentation, right? Rather than trying to assess after the fact that it was either AI generated or not. But the short answer is no, none of these tools can tell you whether it's AI generated. This resonates for all of us beyond school, though, because we read stuff on the internet. We kind of care whether a person put it together or if it's just what some people are increasingly calling digital plastic, just stuff that's made to throw out on the internet that we don't really want to waste our time on because a person didn't really write it. Some copy on a website. No one's ever behind it. It's just AI generated. Let's end this with, well, let's see what it did. This is a podcast about the 11 sources that I've uploaded here.
We're taking a deep dive today into what it takes to build better learning in higher education. Forget scrolling through endless articles. We've synthesized a stack of research to bring you the crucial insights.
Right.
We're looking at how institutions are working to boost program quality, student learning.
Yeah, it's a big topic.
We'll explore everything from faculty collaboration on curriculum to, innovative ways to support instructors and students. It's a revealing look inside higher ed.
It's a crucial area, especially right now. I mean, higher education is under increasing scrutiny.
You think so?
Definitely. To demonstrate its value, think about the global landscape. Alternative educational models popping up.
Like online courses and things?
Exactly. And, well, there's just more public questioning.
Okay, I'm going to stop that after 45 seconds. But I mean, that's 39 minutes and 15 seconds that it generated of that stuff. So it's a little long. I wouldn't listen to that much. That's a little too long. I would have to tell it to, maybe shorten it. I could go back and forth with this, so I could try to tell it to adjust and focus on different things. I'm not going to do that right now, but that's the first pass. What does this demonstrate in terms of where we're heading with this stuff? Is that you're going to take things in one media form and you can transfer them to another media form. So you can have things that are an image and turn them into a movie. You can have things that are a text and turn it into a podcast. You have a bunch of files here. This is just unstructured data. These are PDFs. PDFs notoriously are not readable by any machines because they're basically just like a picture of a document, really. It's just a picture of a document. You might be lucky if it can recognize where the text is on a PDF. So it's just reading through all of this unstructured data and it's generating this podcast style thing. So there's lots of ways that you can start to think a little bit about how might I use this if it's about taking ideas and files and material and data and information and turning it into different forms or organizing it in different ways, that this becomes more than just like write me a 5-page paper on Moby Dick kind of a technology. But these are a few of the directions we're headed in, a few of the big picture ideas. I know I've gone way over time, so I will end it there. But, hopefully this has been helpful in at least thinking through a little bit more about how this works, what it can do, and where we're going. So I'll leave it at that.
I'm playing with it. I just remember you saying that AI just eats everything in the internet.
It does.
Visualize when I'm doing that.
It does eat everything on the internet. That's right. And now it's run out of things to eat on the internet. You would think the internet's really big, and there's